Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking all about contamination OCD. Contamination OCD is one of the most common OCD themes, and it's also one of the most misunderstood. There is a missing component that I have seen time and time again, both in the 2 decades I had a private practice and now in the global community that I help in my AT parenting community. This is often the issue that I see when parents are trying to help their kids with contamination OCD. They're missing the mark. We're going to talk all about what that mark is and how to not miss it, because you may not be making any progress because of this. But before we dive into this today, I do want to thank NoCD for sponsoring this episode. NoCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and they're available in the US and outside the US. You can schedule your free 15-minute consultation to see if NoCD is a right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That is treatmyocd.com. I'll leave a link in the show notes as well. I also want to announce that I actually haven't even talked about this at all. I have a new book coming out, and it actually comes out on Thursday, so I have not done a good job at discussing this. My new book is called Chloe and the Bossy Cloud, and it was developed for the missing age range, the age range between 3 and 6, who doesn't get a lot of resources on OCD. And every time somebody, a parent who wants help and wants a book recommendation for a child between the ages of 3 and 6, I struggle, because the ones that are out there are really good for kids 6 and above. My book, Crushing OCD Workbook for Kids, is great for 6 and above, 6 to 12, 6 to 13, perfect. But what about those 3-year-olds? What about those 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds? And so I reached out to my publisher and I said, the only book I'm going to write, because they keep saying, what book are you going to write? And I said, the only book I'm writing it has to be a picture book for kids with OCD, ages 3 to 6, that really shows all the different ways that OCD can show up. Because a lot of those books are missing moral OCD, harm OCD, and they just talk about hand washing or really basic OCD themes, if that. Or they're like metaphors and they don't ever talk about OCD at all. So I'm super excited. Check out my book. It is called Chloe and the Bossy Cloud, a children's book about OCD. I am very excited about it. Chloe is actually my oldest daughter's name, so that's a little nod to her. And she is an artist, and her roommate was the illustrator. And so Anjali Singh did the illustrations, and they are gorgeous, gorgeous, beautiful book. So check it out. I will leave a link below, or you can go to natashadaniels.com/bossycloud and get your copy. All right, let's get into it for today. So contamination OCD is super common. It's kind of the stereotype of what people think of when they think of OCD, actually. And you would think, because it's so common, that it would be really well understood, but it's not. Just like every other OCD theme, this theme has its problems. And I want to go into, first, I'm going to just talk about what contamination OCD is very briefly, because we're going to dive much, much deeper in this topic. We're not going to stay on the surface for long. So what is contamination OCD? Well, in general, OCD is often an intrusive thought or feeling, the intrusive part, and the need to do something or avoid something to get brief relief. That's what we call the compulsion. So those are the 2 parts of OCD. With contamination OCD, there's an intrusive thought that something is contaminated. There's a contaminant. So there's something that is perceived by OCD as off limits. And we're going to talk about, I didn't say scary or bad. I said off limits, because that's part of what we're going to talk about today. So there's a contaminant, and the bossy part, because there's always the bossy part of OCD, that bossy part is saying you can't touch that contaminant. And not only can you not touch that contaminant, but that contaminant can spread. And so it makes other things contaminated. And when you touch those things, they get contaminated. And so one of the earmarks of contamination OCD is that it spreads. It's like a virus. And part of the struggle of having OCD with contamination OCD is you are mentally having to track this contaminant. And so you're constantly aware of your environment, what you're touching, what other people are touching, what things are touching in other places. And depending on what your core fear or core feeling is, you're also hypervigilant about that. We'll talk about that in a minute. And so you're constantly surveilling your environment. It's very exhausting. And it's a moving target because things that you could once touch, then you can't touch. And there's compulsions also around decontaminating things, and that's different for each person. And so it might include hand washing, the most common one for contamination OCD, and showering or over wiping. But then you also have avoidance, not touching certain things or touching them with a barrier. So touching it with the tissue or touching it with your elbow. There's a lot of avoidance of certain places and people and things that are part of the contaminant. So that avoidance is a big part as well. And there might be checking compulsions. And from there, you can go on and on and on. I mean, you can have a zillion compulsions, but that's at the heart of contamination OCD. So the first mistake that parents often make is they just look at the symptom and they're not looking at it in its totality. And so it's very easy to just be like, I don't know, my child, can't touch the couch and they have to wash their hands and they're in the shower for 5 hours and they take their clothes off and they have to rewash them and they can't touch my purse, and the list goes on and on. And they're just like, that's contamination OCD, and how do we treat it? And they're looking at the symptoms. And I say this a lot, especially in the live classes that I do in the AT parenting community. So if you're an AT parenting community member, you've already heard me say this. A lot of times we're looking at the symptom, and it's like looking at a fever without knowing the causation of the fever. If I have a fever, I'm not going to just stop at the fever. Yeah, I'll treat the fever, but I want to know, why do I have a fever? Like, that's more important, right? Is it because I've got a virus? Is there something wrong with my immune system? Like, obviously the fever is just an indication that there's something else wrong. And compulsions are the fever. They're an indication that something else is wrong. And so it's not the totality of contamination OCD, and it is the symptom. So we want to look at what is driving that contamination OCD. Contamination OCD does have its foundational style. I was trying to think of a different word, but style is the only thing that came up. It's like not the best word, but it has an earmark, right? It's like it looks a certain way, like I just described. And so there is that ground zero, that's the contaminant. And then there's the spreading component. And then there's those very common compulsions. That's the baseline structure of any contamination OCD. And from there, it varies and it looks very different depending on the person. And that people don't understand is that what's driving the contamination is different for each person. And so that's where we want to start. We want to start with, what is the ground zero for this contamination OCD? And what do I mean by that? I mean, what is the contaminant? The contaminant is the thing that OCD wants you to avoid. And then everything that touches it is just in the line of fire. It is a casualty of the contaminant. Does that make sense? So, for example, we often think of germs around contamination OCD. That's also a problem because a lot of times it's not germs. But let's just start with the real stereotype. So yeah, you might have the ground zero might be germs, and even more specifically, stomach virus germs. That might be your ground zero, is stomach virus germs. Maybe I have emetophobia, the fear of throw up, and contamination OCD and emetophobia love to hang out together. And my ground zero is germs, but even more specifically, because we want to get as detailed as possible, is throw up germs. So let's say you have a cold and you touch my cup, maybe my OCD isn't going to freak out nearly as much as if you said you have a virus, specifically a stomach virus. That might make me really panic. And so when it's germs, we still have to look at what do the germs mean for that person. And so with the emetophobia, I'm afraid of stomach virus germs because to me, that means that if I touch it, I might get sick and I might throw up. And my core fear is throw up. So my ground zero are stomach virus germs and my core fear is throwing up. And even more specifically, if I want to go way down that rabbit hole, it might be I don't like the burning sensation when I throw up. Or it might be I'm afraid and it'll be embarrassing and I won't have control when I throw up. There are lots of different core fears around emetophobia. So we can go digging and get lost in that rabbit hole. I do actually have an entire YouTube series on how to find the core fear, and I have a core fear workshop. And so I just pivoted my YouTube channel in the last month or so, and I've made my YouTube videos directly for you, parents. I have over 1,000 videos for kids and teens on my channel. I've done every single topic. I just don't have any more topics to do. If your child has an issue, I have a video for you. A lot of people in the AT parenting community, they're like, is there any topic you haven't done on your YouTube channel? No, there isn't. And so I have pivoted and now it's for parents and I'm role playing a lot. And so it's definitely different material than the podcast. So check it out. Go to natashadaniels.com/YouTube and you will see all my new videos that are there. And I have a playlist on how to find the core fear. So check that out. And I will also add it to the notes so that you can find it there. But let's say the ground zero is something different. And so what if my ground zero is plastic? And I'm using examples that I've heard many, many times in both my practice and in my AT parenting community. So let's say plastic is my ground zero. So anything that touches plastic might get contaminated. I can't touch plastic. I can't eat from plastic. If I touch plastic, I have to wash my hands. But the core fear around plastic, so the ground zero is plastic, which means that's the contaminant. That's the thing that my OCD says is dangerous or not okay. It's not always dangerous, but that is the thing that's driving everything. But that's not the core fear. The core fear is, what does plastic mean to my OCD? And so maybe my OCD says, if you touch plastic, you're going to get cancer because it's carcinogenic. That was a common one. Maybe my contamination ground zero are chemicals. And so I can't touch cleaning materials. I can't touch Clorox wipes. I can't touch anything that my OCD says might be quote unquote poisonous. And my core fear might be, if I touch something poisonous, I might get it in my mouth and I might die. So that's my core fear. Or maybe my ground zero is dust. This is a very common one. And anything that I think gets dusty is now contaminated. And so I avoid contamination around dust. And maybe my core fear, and I'm just giving you examples. It doesn't mean that everybody who has dust as a ground zero has the same core fear. It's different. But maybe my core fear is, I'm afraid it might get into my lungs. And if it gets into my lungs, then I'm not going to be able to breathe. And if I can't breathe, that's really scary. And I want to breathe. It may not even be death. It might just be, it's scary to not be able to breathe. And that's my core fear. So that's just an example. But what some people don't realize is sometimes contamination OCD isn't about a fear. Sometimes it's about a feeling. And we miss these. And so it might be that my ground zero is bodily fluid, like semen or pee or poop. The semen one doesn't get talked about a lot because it's very embarrassing for a lot of kids. But that is a really common ground zero. And my core fear might be, it's just so gross and disgusting. And if I touch it, then I'm disgusting. Or if I spread it, then everybody around me is disgusting. And I might be just overwhelmed with the feeling of grossness, which could be also boogers. I forgot to mention that. So like bodily function could be a very common one. It could be that germs are just disgusting. I'm not afraid of germs hurting me or hurting other people. I'm afraid that germs are gross. I don't like the idea that I might be carrying germs around. And that's just disgusting. And the core fear is that I won't be able to handle this discomfort. That's literally the core fear, is maybe this feeling will never go away. And so if you don't understand the mechanisms of what is driving contamination OCD, it's like you're looking at an iceberg and you're only seeing the little tip that's above the water. You're missing the whole piece underneath. And to really target OCD in a very effective way, and especially for the person who's struggling with it, the more you can understand and fully see the mechanisms behind your OCD and how it operates and what is driving it and what's the fuel to the fire, the more you can decode that, the easier it is to crush it, because you're aware it can't hide anywhere. You know, oh, it's dust. Oh, of course you're going to be upset because she just walked in and she has dusty shoes. And so of course you're going to be right on top of that. Or, yep, of course you're upset because she just served us on plastic plates. And I know that's going to bother you because you think we're going to get cancer. Like, you are able to spot OCD faster and quicker because you're so aware of what your OCD entails. And we really want to help our kids do this. And as parents, it's really helpful because we can see it a mile away too, because we're like, of course that's going to be upsetting because that fits into your contamination OCD issue. And some kids, a lot of people can have contamination OCD and other themes too. Moral OCD likes to go hand in hand with contamination OCD. And so people can become ground zero. And sometimes it's because that person triggers their moral OCD. So you might have somebody who is immoral according to their OCD. Maybe they drink or they smoke or they've done something quote unquote bad. And that person who has contamination OCD, their OCD is latched onto that person and said they're ground zero for what's not moral. And it doesn't mean that they align with this belief. It just means that that's how their OCD is manifesting. And then that person at school touches their backpack or touches their desk, and now their backpack is like a mini ground zero. But when you actually talk about the backpack and why it's contaminated, it goes back further, and it's like the backpack isn't contaminated. It's actually the person who touched the backpack that was the problem. Now, some people get caught in the crossfire of contamination, which means they touch something that was contaminated and now they're contaminated and they're spreading contamination because they are part of the domino chain, but they're not ground zero. And so that's an important thing to look at. Sometimes OCD thinks someone's gross and disgusting, and they are literally ground zero for disgust, and they're walking around spreading it. And so anything that touches that person or that person's clothes, or even if they say something or they breathe in the air, that could be perceived as contaminated because that person is disgusting. So you can see how messy it can get. But normally you can figure out what is the core fear or core feeling driving it and what is the ground zero. And again, ground zero is not the core fear. Ground zero is the main source of the contaminant. And if you have OCD and you think about what is the absolute worst thing I could touch, normally that's your contaminant. That's your ground zero. And then from there, everything else gets contaminated. All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, I'm going to talk about why does this even matter, Natasha? Let's talk about it. Stay tuned. That's what's up next.
It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
There's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers, and so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of like holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was like the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized that it was helpful to do like the exposures. Before it was like really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it, so it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com. Welcome back. Okay, so we have a pretty solid understanding, hopefully, of contamination OCD. I am going to link a whole bunch of videos I have on contamination OCD that I have for kids. I have, I think, 3 or 4 of them that are really good and walk kids through how to tackle contamination OCD, and they'd probably be helpful for you as well. I mean, obviously, I have in-depth courses that will really tackle OCD, but some short videos are sometimes really good, and sometimes that's where we have to start. So why does this matter? Well, like I said before, it is very helpful to just understand the mechanisms of what's driving your OCD in general. But if you don't understand what is actually fueling the contamination OCD, your exposures, ERP, exposure response prevention, which is the gold standard, I know some people don't agree, it is the go-to standard for at least pediatric OCD, if not all of OCD. I think all of OCD. But ERP stands for the exposure, which you trigger. I'm going to trigger OCD. And then the RP is response prevention, which means I'm not going to avoid or I'm not going to wash or whatever that compulsion is. And can't do an exposure without the RP, which means the response prevention of not doing the compulsion. Because if you just trigger OCD and then you do the compulsion, you're just doing a compulsion. You are not doing ERP. But ERP sometimes falls flat. And one of the reasons why it can fall flat is you're not triggering the right thing. You don't understand the core fear or the ground zero of the contamination. For example, if I had a child who is touching doorknobs, I use this as an example a lot because it's just a very simplistic example, and they're avoiding doorknobs and doorknobs are contaminated and it's because of germs, I could have multiple people who are afraid of germs and are not touching doorknobs, and they could be for vastly different things. So person number 1 might be avoiding the doorknob because they're afraid of stomach virus germs and they have emetophobia. Second person might be avoiding the doorknobs because they have germs and they're afraid that if they touch it, it's going to spread to other people, and they have harm OCD and they're worried about being a source of harm to other people. Third person, maybe they're afraid of germs and it's just because germs are gross and they're not afraid of someone getting sick. They're not afraid of making someone else sick. They're not afraid of stomach viruses. They're afraid that they're going to just feel so grossed out they won't be able to handle it. So when we're doing exposures for those 3 people, they're going to look really different. If I did an exposure with the person who's afraid of harming other people and I had them touch the doorknob and then eat something with their contaminated, quote unquote, contaminated hands, that's not going to bother their OCD because they're not worried about themselves and they're not worried about eating off of their dirty hands because it's about other people and harming other people. So a more effective exposure for them would be for them to hand a piece of candy or something to their loved one and have them eat it. That would be powerful. Now, if we swapped that and I had a person who was worried about germs for themselves and they're worried about getting a stomach virus and they're worried about throwing up, if I did an exposure where they touched the doorknob and they touched a piece of candy and they handed it to their parent, that's not going to affect them because that's not touching on their core fear. They're not afraid of their parent getting sick. They're afraid of them getting sick. Now, if I had a person who was feeling overly disgusted by touching a doorknob and I had them hand candy to their loved one, that may not make them triggered either because they're like, this isn't about me. Depends on their OCD. But you can see just from that very brief example that how we craft exposures is important based on what the core fear is driving it. You can still do defense where you avoid not touching the doorknob. It's kind of like two negatives where you do touch the doorknob. And that could be across the board for all three of those people, right? So when I talk about defense, I talk about offense and defense in my OCD course. And what I'm talking about is we want to have both offense and defense when we're tackling OCD. Defense is OCD is knocking, OCD is bossing me, and OCD is telling me to do or avoid something to get brief relief. And that's OCD coming at me, and that's why it's defense. I've got to defend myself from OCD. So I ask myself at that point, do I need to take a tissue to this doorknob or can I touch this doorknob without the tissue? OCD is telling me I cannot touch this doorknob. It's telling me use your elbow or use a tissue. In this moment of defense, can I do the opposite of what OCD wants? Or OCD is saying, oh, you just touched that. You need to go wash your hands. Defense would say, can I delay that? And how long can I delay that? That's defense. Offense, and both are important. Offense is more ERP. It's like saying, what can I do on purpose as an exercise to systematically expose myself to something that would upset my OCD? And so I might on purpose go touch something to make my OCD upset. And when I know what the ground zero is on that, I'm going to be more effective because yes, as defense, I can not avoid the doorknob. But when I'm doing ERP, if you are afraid of norovirus or stomach germs, and I have you touch what may or may not be a cup of pee, just to give you a weird random example, that might make you feel, ew, why am I doing that? But it's not going to trigger your OCD. Where if I had someone whose contamination ground zero is pee and poop, and I have a cup of what may or may not be pee, it's probably lemonade, but let's say we don't know, and I say just pick up the cup, that would be overwhelming for the person whose ground zero is pee, and it would absolutely do nothing for the person who has the fear of stomach viruses. So you can see where once you really are rolling up your sleeves and doing really good ERP work, you're going to want to know what the contaminant is, and you're also going to want to know what the fear is behind it. And if it's not a fear, and if it's a feeling. For example, if I had a core fear that if I touch pee or poop, I'm going to smell. And everybody's going to smell me and they're going to hate me and they're going to be like, ew, you're so gross. And I'm going to get alienated and no one's going to be friends with me. That's my core fear. And my ground zero is pee and poop because it smells. And so maybe my compulsions are over cleaning, over wiping, checking, asking other people, do I smell? And so that might be one person. And maybe I have another person who says, ew, if I touch pee, it's just disgusting. It's gross. It's like bodily fluid. The idea of it is nasty. I won't be able to handle that discomfort. So let's just use those two as an example. Two very different core fears, but the same ground zero. So their ground zero, their contaminant, right? Not contamination, because contamination can mean anything could be contaminated. But this is the contaminant. This is the ground zero. And they both have the exact same ground zero, P. We're just using this as an example. And so both people have ground zero as the P. That's the contaminant. But let's say the exposure is, and I'm just using you'd have to be way up on your exposure ladder to do this. But let's say there's a cup of what may or may not be pee in it, right? This might be an exposure. And you just have to pick up the cup and it may or may not have pee in it. For the person who just feels like pee is disgusting, yeah, that would be uncomfortable. And for the person who feels like they might get the smell on them, that's uncomfortable. So on a baseline level, that exposure is hard for both of them. And that's fine, right? That's a great exposure. That's fine. But once they get used to that, or when we're doing it, could we make it even more effective by adding another layer, and a layer that actually touches on their particular core fear? I think that's powerful. And so for the person who gets used to touching it, who's worried that they're going to smell, we might do an imaginal script, which is like a story that they read while they're doing it, that might mention, and then all the P molecules are getting on you. And what if you smell? What if somebody smells you later? Right? We might add a little sprinkle of that. Oh, that's a very stinky cup there that you're touching. We might trigger the core fear intentionally with their agreement. We're not doing this to people, we're doing it with them. And with the person who is just disgusted by that, we might really turn the volume up on that disgust. And we might say something like, yeah, that bodily fluid that's just sitting there that came out of somebody's body, you're just sitting there holding it, gonna feel really gross, right? So we might just turn up the volume on disgust. If I said that about the bodily fluid being in somebody's body to the person who's afraid of smelling, that's not going to do anything. I mean, they're going to be like, okay, yeah, whatever, because that's not their core fear. So when we understand their core fear, we're able to do effective exposures. We're able to actually do exposures directly to the core fear. And when we know the ground zero, I don't need to mess around with doorknobs and toilets. I can do it. That's fine. I mean, you're always playing defense. So you're trying to not avoid these things, not wipe and wipe down things and all that. But when I'm doing exposures, if I can actually get to the source of the contaminant, the ground zero, that's 10 times more powerful, right? I don't need to mess around with the bathroom when I can just bring the actual contaminant to the issue. You work up to that. That might be obviously too much too soon. You have to have a therapist guide you through this and understand it and take you in small increments. But what I'm trying to get you to see, and what I hope that you're getting out of this talk today, this episode, is that when you understand what is the ground zero contaminant, and when you understand the core fear or core feeling, you have a lot more power in treatment when you're doing ERP, which hopefully you have a therapist that is guiding you, and you can help the therapist by saying, this is my ground zero, or this is my core fear or my core feeling. And let's talk about how we can sprinkle that into exposures, because a very green new OCD therapist may not know how important the core fear is. It's just a gift when you can find an OCD therapist in general. And when you find one that even understands the nuances of core fears and core feelings and ground zero for contamination OCD, that's rare, to be honest. And so sometimes you getting the most education that you can and bringing your information into the sessions and incorporating that can be a really powerful contribution to therapy and progress therapy, so that you're not spending a fortune forever in therapy, which a lot of us can do. And that can get very expensive very fast. So I hope that you found this helpful. I will link my core fear YouTube playlist, and I will link my core fear workshop so that you can check that out. I will also link my contamination videos that I have on YouTube so that you can show your child. And I hope that you found this helpful. Don't forget to check out Chloe and the Bossy Cloud if you have a little one, 3 to 6. If you have an older one who just maybe likes visuals more, or just a story about OCD, this one is just very simplistic. Like my OCD workbook, Crushing OCD Workbook for Kids, is like therapy. It's detailed, and it's literally everything that I would do for kids from the very beginning of our session to the end of treatment and to maintenance and beyond. That sounded like Buzz Lightyear. To maintenance and beyond. But that book, like there are people who get that book who don't have access to therapy, and they say that was enough to move the dial. Or they take that and my OCD course for kids and they're like, that was perfect. That was enough, because it's literally created by an OCD therapist, and it's literally everything I do in my therapy sessions. This book is different. It's a storybook. It's an introduction to have language, to personify OCD, to understand that OCD can give you these feelings. And so it's all about a bossy cloud that comes into this girl's bedroom and starts bossing her around. And she thinks it's her friend at first, and she thinks it's keeping her safe. And turns out that it's not. So it's there to give a nice introduction to OCD. So check it out, natashadaniels.com/bossycloud, and check out the artwork too, and let me know what you think. If you're on Spotify, you can actually leave comments. I didn't realize this until somebody in the AT parenting community told me that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm never on Spotify. So under this episode, you can leave comments. And if you're not on Spotify and you're listening somewhere else, go on Spotify. It's free, and leave a comment. You can always leave a review on Apple or wherever you consume your podcast. But on Spotify, you can leave comments under this particular episode, which is cool. And let me know what you think about the artwork. I'd love to hear it. And let me know what you think about this episode. And if you are writing a review or a comment, I will read it next time to show my gratitude. So I appreciate that. So don't forget to find the sparkle in everything you do. And I'll talk to you again next Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.